History loves to pretend that conquerors won through brute force, massive armies, and sheer violence. That's the boring version. The real version involves greased ship decks, pantless sailors, flaming camels, and a man who conquered a city by climbing into his own coffin. These are 33 conquerors who were so ridiculously cunning that your history teacher either didn't know about them or was too embarrassed to bring them up. And fair warning, at least 3 of these are going to make you pause the video just to tell someone nearby. 1. In 1801, British naval commander Lord Cochrane found himself wildly outnumbered during a nighttime engagement off the coast of Spain, with enemy sailors preparing to board his ship. Most captains would have braced for a bloody deck fight. Not Cochrane. He ordered his crew to grease the entire deck with animal fat, turning his ship into what was essentially a floating ice rink. Enemy boarders scrambled over the railing and immediately started sliding, falling, and crashing into each other like the world's worst comedy sketch. But Cochrane wasn't finished being insane. He also ordered his own sailors to remove their pants. Why? Because in the pitch-black chaos of a nighttime battle, the only reliable way to tell friend from foe was to reach out and check if the guy next to you was wearing trousers. If he was, stab him. If he wasn't, he's on your team. It's the only military strategy in history where no pants was a tactical advantage. 2. In the 3rd century, Chinese strategist Zhuge Liang was trapped inside a nearly empty city with barely a handful of soldiers when a massive enemy army of over 100,000 troops appeared on the horizon. Any normal person would have panicked. Zhuge Liang grabbed a lute. He ordered the city gates thrown wide open, had a few old men start casually sweeping the streets, then climbed up to the top of the city wall and sat there, calmly playing music. The approaching commander, Sima Yi, took one look at this scene, a defenseless city with its doors open and a man serenading him from the wall, and thought, this is absolutely a trap. He turned his entire army around and retreated. Zhuge Liang won a confrontation against 100,000 soldiers armed with nothing but vibes, a stringed instrument, and the audacity of a man who understood that sometimes the scariest thing you can do is act like you have absolutely nothing to worry about. 3. In the year 946, Princess Olga of Kyiv had a problem. The Drevlian tribe had murdered her husband, Prince Igor, and then had the nerve to send her a marriage proposal, suggesting she wed their own prince. Olga smiled, played along, and then systematically destroyed them in a revenge campaign so creative it still makes historians uncomfortable. For the grand finale, after besieging their capital city of Iskorostan for over a year, she offered peace in exchange for the most humble tribute imaginable, just 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from every household. The Drevlians, thrilled at such a cheap deal, happily handed over the birds. Olga's soldiers then tied small bundles of smoldering sulfur and cloth to each bird and released them at nightfall. Every single bird flew straight home, right back into the thatched roofs and wooden eaves of Iskorostan. The entire city caught fire simultaneously. She literally weaponized homesickness. 4. In 47 BC, Julius Caesar faced a mutiny from his most elite troops, the legendary 10th Legion, hardened veterans who had bled across Gaul and demanded their overdue bonuses and land. These were the toughest soldiers in the Roman world, and they were angry. Generals before Caesar had bribed mutinous troops or executed ringleaders. Caesar simply walked out, looked them dead in the eye, and said one word: Quirites. Citizens. Not soldiers, not comrades, not men. Citizens. In Roman culture, calling a soldier a citizen meant you were dismissing him from the army. It meant they were no longer legionaries. They would receive no share of the coming campaign's plunder, no glory, no land. Just a ticket home as nobody. The effect was instantaneous. These battle-scarred, sword-wielding killers broke down and wept. They literally begged Caesar to take them back and punish the ringleaders himself. He crushed a mutiny without drawing a single sword, using nothing but a vocabulary lesson and the most devastating insult in Roman military culture. 5. Around 325 BC, when Alexander the Great finally began his long retreat from India, his army was exhausted, battered, and dangerously far from home. The local tribes were watching, circling, waiting for the moment to strike a weakened army. So Alexander, being Alexander, decided to leave behind a little surprise. He ordered his blacksmiths to forge oversized armor, massive breastplates, helmets designed for heads twice normal size, swords too heavy for any ordinary man to lift, and enormous horse mangers built for animals that simply didn't exist. He scattered all of it across his abandoned campsite like props from a mythology set. When the local tribes cautiously crept into the deserted camp, they found evidence of an army apparently made up of 10-foot-tall giants, riding horses the size of elephants. Nobody pursued Alexander after that. He basically invented the world's first fake monster movie set, and his audience completely bought it. 6. On November 13, 1805, Napoleon needed to capture the Tabor Bridge over the Danube in Vienna, a bridge the Austrians had rigged with explosives and guarded with cannons. A direct assault would have been suicide. So Marshals Murat and Lannes just walked up to it. In their full-dress uniforms, dripping with medals and decorations, the two French marshals casually strolled across the bridge toward the stunned Austrian guards, chatting and laughing like they were on a Sunday afternoon walk. They cheerfully announced that an armistice had been signed and the bridge was to be handed over. When an Austrian sergeant tried to light the fuses, Lannes personally scolded him for trying to violate a peace agreement. While the confused Austrians debated what was happening, French grenadiers quietly marched across the bridge behind them. By the time anyone realized there was no armistice, it was too late. Two men in fancy hats talked their way past an entire garrison guarding a mined bridge. Just pure, weapons-grade audacity. 7. In 1398, when Timur the Conqueror marched on the Delhi Sultanate, he ran into a terrifying problem. Over 100 armored war elephants with poisoned tusks, essentially living tanks that could crush cavalry and scatter infantry. European armies would have panicked. Timur loaded his camels with bales of dry straw and hay, set them on fire, and then jabbed the camels with spears to send them stampeding directly toward the elephant line. Picture this for a second. Hundreds of screaming, burning camels charging headlong at elephants. The elephants, despite their armor and training, had never seen or smelled anything like flaming, shrieking camels. They completely lost their minds, turned around, and stampeded directly back through their own army, crushing the very soldiers they were supposed to protect. Timur defeated the most advanced war machines of his era by essentially inventing the world's most horrifying firework display using livestock. 8. During a sweltering military campaign in the late 2nd century, the warlord Cao Cao was marching his army through scorching terrain with no water source in sight. His soldiers were collapsing from dehydration, morale was cratering, and the march was grinding to a halt. Any other commander would have ordered a desperate search for a well or a river. Cao Cao just pointed ahead and announced that he could see a massive forest of plum trees just over the next hill. Plums. Sour, juicy, mouth-watering plums. The mere thought of biting into sour fruit triggered an involuntary response. Every soldier's mouth started watering. That tiny burst of saliva was enough moisture to keep the army moving just long enough to reach an actual water source. He saved his army from collapse using a lie and basic biology. This story became so famous in China that quenching thirst by thinking of plums is still a common Chinese proverb over 1,800 years later. 9. In 539 BC, Cyrus the Great stood before the walls of Babylon, one of the most heavily fortified cities in the ancient world. Its walls were reportedly so thick that chariots could race along the top, and the Euphrates River flowed directly through the city, making a siege nearly impossible. Most conquerors would have camped outside and waited years. Cyrus looked at the river and thought, "What if I just moved it?" He secretly ordered his engineers to dig massive diversion channels upstream, gradually rerouting the Euphrates away from the city. On the night of a grand Babylonian festival, while the inhabitants were drinking and celebrating, the water level beneath the city walls dropped to knee-height. Persian soldiers waded through the muddy riverbed, slipped under the walls, and captured Babylon almost without a fight. The greatest city in the ancient world fell, because one man decided a river was just an inconvenience that needed rescheduling. 10. In 701 BC, the Assyrian king Sennacherib sent his army to conquer Jerusalem, ruled by King Hezekiah of Judah. But before launching any attack, Sennacherib deployed a weapon far cheaper than battering rams, a guy with a loud voice. He sent his chief officer, known as the Rabshakeh, to stand outside the walls of Jerusalem and deliver the ancient equivalent of a psychological warfare broadcast. The Rabshakeh didn't speak Aramaic, the diplomatic language that only the elites understood. He deliberately spoke in Hebrew, the common language, so that every single person standing on those walls, every baker, every farmer, every terrified parent, could understand every word. He shouted that their king was lying to them, that their God couldn't save them, and that surrender was their only option. Hezekiah's officials actually begged the Rabshakeh to switch to Aramaic so the common people wouldn't panic. He refused and kept shouting. It was literally weaponized public speaking, a one-man propaganda broadcast designed to break a city from the inside out. 11. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II was besieging Constantinople, and a massive iron chain stretched across the Golden Horn waterway was blocking his entire fleet from reaching the city's vulnerable harbor. Generations of invaders had tried and failed to get past that chain. Mehmed decided that if his ships couldn't go through the water, they would go over the land. He ordered his engineers to lay a road of greased wooden logs across several miles of hilly terrain from the Bosphorus to the Golden Horn, completely bypassing the chain. Then he had his soldiers physically drag around 70 warships uphill, over a ridge, and back down into the harbor on the other side. In a single night, the defenders of Constantinople woke up the next morning to find an entire enemy fleet sitting comfortably in their supposedly protected harbor, as if it had teleported there. The chain that had protected the city for centuries had been rendered completely useless by a man who simply refused to accept that boats belong in water. 12. Around 530 BC, Queen Tomyris of the besieged, a fierce, nomadic people of Central Asia, was at war with Cyrus the Great of Persia, the most powerful conqueror on the planet. Cyrus had already tricked and captured her son by leaving a camp full of wine for the besieged warriors, who were unfamiliar with alcohol. They drank themselves unconscious and were slaughtered. Tomyris was devastated, but she didn't crumble. She sent Cyrus a message that essentially said, "Give me back my son, or I will give you more blood than you can drink." Cyrus refused. In the final battle, Tomyris turned his own tactics against him, luring the Persian army into unfavorable terrain and annihilating them. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, after Cyrus was killed, Tomyris found his body, dipped his severed head into a wineskin filled with blood, and said, "I warned you." She defeated the man who had conquered most of the known world, and she made sure the last thing his corpse tasted was the blood he'd been so thirsty for. 13. During the Three Kingdoms period in China, the brilliant strategist Zhuge Liang was tasked with obtaining 100,000 arrows in just 3 days, an impossible deadline clearly designed by a rival to get him executed for failure. Instead of panicking, Zhuge Liang waited for a foggy night, loaded 20 boats with bundles of straw tied to their sides, and sailed them straight toward the enemy fleet of Cao Cao. In the dense fog, Cao Cao's commanders couldn't see what was approaching. Terrified of a surprise attack, they ordered their archers to unleash everything they had into the mist. Thousands of arrows thudded into the straw-covered boats from both sides. When the straw was thoroughly pin-cushioned and the fog began to lift, Zhuge Liang simply ordered his boats to turn around and sail home, now bristling with roughly 100,000 free enemy arrows. He met his impossible deadline by literally making the enemy deliver his ammunition for him, and he did it without losing a single soldier. History's greatest Amazon delivery was powered entirely by fog and audacity. 14. In 217 BC, Hannibal Barca found himself trapped by the Roman general Fabius Maximus in a valley in Campania, with Roman troops blocking every exit. It looked like the end for the Carthaginian genius. That night, Hannibal ordered his men to gather about 2,000 cattle from the surrounding countryside and tie lit torches to their horns. Then he drove the terrified, fire-headed cows toward the mountain passes where the Romans were guarding the exits, The Roman sentries, seeing thousands of bobbing lights moving through the darkness in the hills, were absolutely convinced it was Hannibal's entire army, attempting a breakout. They abandoned their positions and rushed to intercept what turned out to be a stampede of very confused and very angry cattle. While the Romans were busy fighting livestock, Hannibal marched his actual army through the now unguarded pass and escaped cleanly into the night. He broke out of a Roman death trap using nothing but cows, fire, and the fact that panicked bulls at night look surprisingly like marching soldiers. 15. During a siege in France, King Richard the Lionheart ran into a problem that would have stopped most medieval commanders cold. He had run out of materials for his siege engines. No lead, no bronze, no copper for the heavy bolts and fittings his engineers needed to build the machines that could crack open castle walls. A lesser king would have retreated or settled in for a long wait. Richard sent his men into the surrounding villages with a simple request: "Bring me every copper cooking pot you own, and I will pay you well." The local peasants, probably bewildered but happy to make a profit, hauled in cartloads of pots, pans, kettles, and cauldrons. Richard's engineers melted them all down on the spot and recast the copper into siege engine components. Within days, the castle walls were being battered by artillery forged from someone's grandmother's soup pot. It's one of history's most creative examples of military improvisation, turning a medieval kitchen into a weapons factory. 16. On the night of June 17, 1462, Vlad III of Wallachia, better known as Vlad the Impaler, led roughly 7,000 of his men on one of the most audacious raids in military history. His target was the camp of Sultan Mehmed II, the same man who had conquered Constantinople, now sitting outside the Wallachian capital with an army of over 100,000. Vlad dressed his soldiers in captured Ottoman uniforms and turbans, and under the cover of total darkness, they infiltrated the enemy camp. The goal was to assassinate the Sultan himself. They came horrifyingly close, slaughtering their way through the camp in absolute chaos. The Ottomans, unable to tell friend from foe in the darkness, started killing each other. By dawn, thousands of Ottoman soldiers were dead, many by friendly fire, and Mehmed's army was so psychologically shattered that it began to retreat. Vlad didn't win the war, but he terrorized the most powerful empire on earth using darkness, disguises, and the kind of ruthless boldness that earned him his terrifying nickname. 17. In 52 BC, Julius Caesar besieged the Gallic stronghold of Alesia, where the chieftain Vercingetorix had holed up with around 80,000 warriors. A normal siege wall would keep the defenders in, but Caesar knew a massive Gallic relief army was racing toward him from outside. So he built two walls. The inner wall, called the circumvallation, was roughly 18 kilometers long and faced inward to trap Vercingetorix. The outer wall, the contravallation, was 21 kilometers long and faced outward to hold off the incoming relief force. Caesar literally sandwiched his own army between two enemy forces and said, "This is fine." His troops fought in both directions simultaneously, holding off attacks from the front and the rear. It was a military donut of death, and it worked. Vercingetorix surrendered. The relief army was crushed, and Caesar conquered Gaul. The man who should have been the one trapped ended up trapping everyone else, including himself, and somehow still won. 18. During the Battle of Mu'tah, in 629, the Muslim commander Khaled ibn al-Walid found himself massively outnumbered by Byzantine forces. Retreat was the only smart option, but retreating from a larger army usually means getting chased down and slaughtered. So Khalid needed to make the Byzantines think twice. He reorganized his troops overnight, swapping the left and right flanks and placing fresh units at the front so the enemy would see unfamiliar banners and faces the next morning, creating the illusion of reinforcements. Then he ordered a detachment of cavalry to ride behind the Muslim lines, dragging tree branches to raise a massive rolling cloud of dust. From the Byzantine perspective, it looked exactly like thousands of fresh troops were pouring in from the horizon. The Byzantines, already cautious after a hard fight, decided this was not worth the risk and pulled back. Khalid saved his army from annihilation using a personnel shuffle, some tree branches, and the greatest dust storm ever staged on purpose. 19. During the Mongol conquests, Genghis Khan laid siege to a well-fortified city and, after weeks of getting nowhere, offered the defenders a remarkably generous deal: surrender, and all he wanted as tribute was 1,000 cats and several thousand birds. The confused but relieved defenders eagerly gathered the animals and handed them over, probably thinking they had gotten the deal of the century. They had not. The Mongols tied small bundles of oil-soaked cotton to the animals and set them on fire. Every terrified cat and bird did exactly what any animal does when it's scared. It ran straight home. Hundreds of flaming animals bolted through the gates and back into the city, landing on rooftops, diving into hay stores, and nesting in wooden eaves. The entire city erupted in fire from the inside, from every direction simultaneously. The defenders couldn't fight the Mongol army and 1,000 small fires at the same time. Genghis Khan conquered a city by turning its own pets into guided incendiary missiles. 20. Philip II of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great, built the military machine that would eventually conquer the known world. But his favorite weapon wasn't a spear or a siege tower. It was a bag of gold. Philip was legendary for corrupting enemy politicians, bribing gatekeepers, and buying alliances instead of fighting for them. He systematically undermined Greek city-states from within, funding pro-Macedonian factions and turning rivals against each other. His most famous line, which became one of antiquity's greatest quotes, sums up his entire strategy: "No wall is so high that a donkey loaded with gold cannot get over it." While his son Alexander would go on to conquer Persia with military genius, Philip conquered Greece by understanding that every fortress has a price tag. He proved that sometimes the most devastating weapon in a conqueror's arsenal isn't the army outside the gates, but the person inside them who's willing to open them for the right amount of money. 21. In 341 BC, the Chinese military strategist Sun Bin was retreating from a much larger enemy force commanded by his personal rival, Pang Huan. Instead of simply running, Sun Bin turned his retreat into an elaborate psychological trap. On the first night, he ordered his army to light 100,000 cooking fires. The next night, 50,000. The night after that, 30,000. Pang Huan, who was tracking Sun Bin by counting campfires, became convinced that the retreating army was hemorrhaging deserters and falling apart. Excited by what he thought was a disintegrating enemy, Pang Huan abandoned his slower infantry and charged ahead with just his cavalry to finish Sun Bin off quickly. He rode straight into an ambush at Maling Pass, where Sun Bin had stripped the bark off a large tree and written on it, "Pang Huan dies under this tree." When Pang Huan lit a torch to read the message, it was the signal. Sun Bin's hidden archers unleashed a devastating volley. The man who thought he was chasing a broken army found out he was the prey all along. 22. At the Battle of Thimbra, around 547 BC, Cyrus the Great faced the Lydian army under King Croesus, one of the richest men in history, whose cavalry was considered among the finest in the ancient world. Cyrus knew his horses couldn't match them, so he got creative in the most ridiculous way possible. He put his warriors on camels. Not war camels, baggage camels. The smelly, stubborn, unglamorous beasts that normally carried supplies. Here's the thing about horses in the ancient world: they were terrified of camels. The unfamiliar smell, the weird shape, the strange noises. When Croesus's beautiful, well-trained cavalry horses caught a whiff of the camel line, they lost their minds. Riders were thrown, formations shattered, and the pride of the Lydian army turned into chaos before a single blow was landed. Cyrus defeated the finest cavalry in the known world using what were essentially oversized, foul-smelling pack mules. It was the ancient equivalent of winning a Formula One race with a garbage truck. 23. In 203 BC, the Roman general Scipio Africanus was camped in North Africa, preparing for his final showdown with Carthage. The enemy had two camps nearby, one Carthaginian under Hasdrubal, one Numidian under King Syphax. Scipio sent envoys to negotiate peace, but the real mission was espionage. He disguised experienced military officers as servants and slaves in the diplomatic delegation. While the actual diplomats chatted, the servants wandered around, carefully noting that both enemy camps were built almost entirely from dry reeds and wooden stakes. No stone, no brick. Just kindling, waiting for a match. Scipio broke off negotiations and attacked at midnight. His soldiers weren't ordered to fight, they were ordered to set fires. Both camps erupted into massive infernos. Soldiers stumbled out of burning shelters in the dark, and those who escaped the flames ran straight into Roman swords. Thousands died before they even understood what was happening. Scipio won one of the most decisive battles of the Second Punic War, with intelligence gathered by fake servants and one very big lighter. 24. Wu Zetian, the only woman in over 2,000 years of Chinese imperial history to officially rule as emperor in her own name, had a legitimacy problem. Confucian tradition was clear. Women do not sit on the dragon throne. Period. So Wu Zetian did what any resourceful ruler would do. She manufactured divine approval. In the year 688, a large stone was conveniently discovered in the Luo River by one of her allies. Carved into it was an ancient-looking prophecy declaring that a holy woman would come to rule China and bring an era of eternal prosperity. What a coincidence. Wu Zetian treated this obviously planted rock as though the heavens themselves had issued a press release endorsing her reign. She used it to justify deposing her own son, establishing a brand new dynasty, and eliminating anyone who questioned her right to rule. She governed China for 15 years, outlasting countless conspiracies. The woman literally rocked her way to absolute power, one forged prophecy at a time. 25. Jan Žižka was a minor Bohemian nobleman who became the most terrifying military commander of the 15th century, and he did it while completely blind. After losing his one remaining eye in battle around 1421, Žižka didn't retire. He kept commanding armies and kept winning, never losing a single battle in his entire career. His secret weapon was the war wagon. He took ordinary farm wagons, reinforced them with heavy wooden planks and iron plating, mounted cannons and crossbows inside, and chained them together into mobile fortresses. When attacked, the wagons would circle into a defensive formation, creating an armored wall of rolling firepower. Crusader knights, the medieval equivalent of main battle tanks, charged his wagon formations again and again and were slaughtered every single time. Žižka essentially invented the concept of armored mobile warfare roughly 500 years before the first actual tank rolled onto a World War I battlefield. A blind man saw the future of warfare more clearly than anyone with two working eyes. 26. The Warlord. Cao Cao, one of the most cunning political operators in Chinese history, once intercepted a letter being sent from an enemy general to a neutral lord whose allegiance was still up for grabs. Instead of destroying the letter or forging a new one, Cao Cao did something far more devious. He took the original letter, deliberately smeared the ink in key places, and crossed out several important lines, making it look like someone had tried to hide specific information. Then he sent it on to the neutral lord as if nothing had happened. When the lord received this suspiciously defaced letter, he didn't think the enemy general had sent a damaged message. He assumed the general was hiding something from him, that the crossed-out parts contained secret deals or betrayals he wasn't supposed to see. Paranoia did the rest. The lord, now deeply suspicious of his supposed ally, switched his allegiance to Cao Cao. He won a political ally without writing a single word of his own. Just ink, suspicion, and a masterful understanding that people will always assume the worst about what they cannot read. 27. On July 4, 1187, Saladin achieved one of the most devastating military victories of the entire Crusader era at the Battle of the Horns of Hattin. But the battle was won before a single sword was drawn. Saladin lured the Crusader army under King Guy of Jerusalem into marching across a waterless plateau in the scorching July heat, away from their water sources at the Sea of Galilee. By the time the exhausted, dehydrated Crusaders made camp on the dry hillside near the twin peaks known as the Horns of Hattin, they were already half defeated. Then Saladin ordered his men to set fire to the dry scrub grass surrounding the Crusader position. Smoke choked the already parched knights, the heat became unbearable, and the Crusaders could barely see or breathe, let alone fight. When Saladin's fresh, well-watered army finally attacked, it was less a battle and more a collapse. He didn't just outfight the Crusaders, he outthought them, using thirst, heat, and smoke as his most effective soldiers. 28. In one of the oldest recorded military deceptions, the Israelite leader Gideon was commanded to attack the massive Midianite army camped in the valley below, with only 300 men. The tactic was as bizarre as the odds. Each man was given a clay pitcher with a lit torch hidden inside and a trumpet. In the dead of night, Gideon's 300 surrounded the Midianite camp on 3 sides, and on his signal, they simultaneously smashed their pitchers, revealing the blazing torches, and blasted their trumpets as loudly as possible. The Midianites, jolted awake by what sounded and looked like an enormous army closing in from every direction, panicked completely. In the darkness and confusion, they turned on each other, slashing at anyone nearby, unable to tell friend from foe. The army essentially self-destructed. Gideon routed a force of tens of thousands without his men swinging a single sword, using nothing but noise, light, and the universal human terror of being woken up in the middle of the night by something you don't understand. 29. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great arrived at the island city of Tyre, a wealthy Phoenician stronghold sitting about half a mile off the coast of modern-day Lebanon. The Tyrians looked at the water separating them from Alexander's landlocked army and felt perfectly safe. They told Alexander basically, "Good luck swimming." Alexander didn't swim. He decided to erase the ocean. For 7 brutal months, his engineers and soldiers dumped rocks, rubble, timber, and earth into the Mediterranean, building a massive causeway from the mainland directly to the island. The Tyrians threw everything they had at the project: fire ships, catapults, boiling oil, but Alexander just kept building. When the causeway finally reached the walls, the city fell in a devastating assault. And here's the permanent part. All that rubble Alexander dumped into the sea accumulated so much silt over the centuries that the island of Tyre is now a peninsula. It has been physically attached to the mainland ever since. Alexander didn't just conquer a city, he rearranged the geography. 30. Subutai, Genghis Khan's greatest general and arguably the most successful military commander in human history, conquered more territory than anyone before or since, sweeping through Russia, Poland, and Hungary in the 1240s. He did all of this without radios, telephones, or any form of instant communication. His solution was a stunningly sophisticated coordination system using a combination of signal arrows that whistled different tones, colored flags visible from hilltops, smoke signals, and networks of mounted messengers riding in relays across hundreds of kilometers. Using this system, Subutai could coordinate multiple armies operating in different countries, hundreds of miles apart, to attack at precisely the right moment. During the invasion of Hungary in 1241, he synchronized armies separated by the Carpathian Mountains to converge on the enemy simultaneously. European commanders, who could barely coordinate forces across a single battlefield, had absolutely no answer for a general who was running a continental-scale military operation with the communication technology of the 13th century. 31. In 184 BC, an aging Hannibal Barca, decades removed from his famous campaigns against Rome, found himself commanding a fleet for the kingdom of Bithynia in a naval battle against the forces of King Eumenes of Pergamon. Hannibal was outgunned and outmanned, but he had one last trick. He ordered his sailors to collect every venomous snake they could find and stuff them into clay pots. During the battle, Bithynian ships pulled alongside enemy vessels and catapulted the snake-filled jars onto their decks. Imagine being a sailor in the middle of a sea fight, and suddenly a clay pot explodes at your feet and a dozen angry, venomous snakes pour out across the deck. Crews panicked, abandoned their fighting positions, and some reportedly jumped overboard entirely. Hannibal won the battle. It was the last recorded military victory of one of history's greatest generals, and he pulled it off with homemade reptile grenades. Even in his 60s, Hannibal was still finding ways to make his enemies deeply uncomfortable. 32. In the 11th century, the legendary Norse warrior Harald Hardrada was campaigning across the Mediterranean and set his sights on a well-fortified Sicilian city that had resisted every direct assault. So Harald came up with a plan that was equal parts theatrical and psychotic. He faked his own death. His men announced to the city's defenders that their great chieftain had died and that his final wish was to receive a Christian burial inside the city's church. The city's clergy, honoring what they believed was a sincere religious request, opened the gates and allowed the funeral procession to carry the coffin inside. As the mourners reached the gate, Harold burst from the coffin very much alive. His warriors dropped their fake grief and drew their weapons, and they physically blocked the gates open for the rest of the Norse army to pour in. The city fell in minutes. Harold conquered a fortress by getting his enemies to literally carry him inside it. It's the most aggressive open casket funeral in recorded history. 33. Genghis Khan's military genius is famous, but his marriage strategy might have been even more brilliant. He systematically married his daughters to the kings of allied or conquered nations, which sounds like standard medieval diplomacy. Except Genghis added a twist. After the wedding, he would immediately assign his new son-in-law to the front lines of the next military campaign, the most dangerous assignment possible. These husbands died at a suspiciously high rate. When they did, Mongol law allowed the widowed daughters to inherit their dead husbands' kingdoms. Over time, Genghis Khan's daughters ended up controlling vast swaths of the Silk Road and critical trade routes across Asia, ruling as powerful queens in their own right. He didn't conquer these kingdoms through war. He conquered them through wedding invitations and strategically fatal job assignments. It was geopolitical chess played through matrimony, and the brides were the most powerful pieces on the board. 33 conquerors. Not one of them won by just showing up with a bigger stick. They won because they understood something most people still don't. The battlefield is in your opponent's head, and the war is over the second you get inside it. Now, I know for a fact we left some absolute masterminds off this list, so here's what I need from you. Drop in the comments the most cunning military trick or conqueror we completely missed, the one that should have been number 34, because whoever names the best one might just end up in the next video. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it, and smash that like button if any of these genuinely caught you off guard.